Speaking of President Biden, his nomination of Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson to the Supreme Court has triggered intense scrutiny of her record, with most of the focus expected on her judicial philosophy rather than her personal history. What do we know so far about the judge who has been tapped to replace Supreme Court Justice Stephen Breyer when he retires later this year? Joining me now to talk about this by phone is Carrie Severino, president of the Judicial Crisis Network. Carrie, welcome back to Washington Watch.
Thanks so much for having me.
So what do we know about Judge Jackson so far?
Well, she's been a judge for a while now, for almost 9 years, and most of that time on the district court in D.C. In that time, she's obviously had to decide a lot of cases. One of my concerns is that a lot of those cases were ones dealing with Trump regulations, and we saw her overturning many of those regulations, or at least attempting to, in cases where she didn't really have the judicial authority to do so, and later had to be reversed by the D.C. Circuit. Now, remember, the D.C. Circuit, which is the appellate court over her at that time, is majority liberal appointees, and some of these panels that were reversing her included 2 out of 3 liberal judges. So that really says to me, I'm concerned that this is someone who's making political decisions reaching beyond their judicial role. And then finally, I was very concerned because she had an exchange with Senator Cruz during her Judiciary Committee hearing for the current role she has, which is now as an appellate judge. And Senator Cruz asked her if she endorsed the living Constitution, this idea that judges can kind of evolve the Constitution rather than just interpret the words as they were written. She said she didn't really have a position on how to interpret the Constitution. I find that really shocking for someone who already is a federal judge, who is getting a promotion to an appellate judge. Frankly, I would find that shocking from a third-year law student. And so it's really concerning to me that someone who could be sitting on the Supreme Court, the last word on the Constitution, either has no interpretive philosophy of how to interpret that document or is unwilling to share that with the American people.
Well, her judicial education, her academic background's quite impressive, but it is reflective, I think, of where the Ivy League law schools are for the most part today. So I think when you look at, as you said, her judicial philosophy or where she's come down, the fact that you've had the D.C. district overturn her, I mean, she's left of the left, it would appear.
Absolutely. I mean, there were several judges that he was kind of deciding between, and it seems very clear. He went with the most liberal judge he could, which is amazing. He's got 50 votes in the Senate, but I think he's so confident. He knows that he can get Senator Manchin and Senator Sinema to vote for basically anyone he puts up, because that's what they've done so far. They voted for every single Democratic nominee. And he was also getting a lot of pressure from the liberal dark money groups who bankrolled his campaign, spent hundreds of millions of dollars. They said it's Ketanji or bust, basically, and they wanted the most liberal judge they could possibly get their hands on. So that I think is the reason he went in this direction rather than one of the potentially more moderate picks he could have gone with.
Let's talk about that for just a moment, Carrie. The dark money that has been behind this, even to the point of forcing, really, Justice Breyer to retire. This has been a well-funded, well-coordinated effort that has got us to this point.
Oh, absolutely. And we're just starting to learn the real extent of it. There are a lot of groups that sound like they're different groups, but they're all part of this overarching umbrella network that we call Arabella Advisors. And they say, oh, we're not any one of these groups. They have hundreds of groups underneath them that are then can just kind of give the appearance of being lots of different interest groups. You might have Floridians for healthcare and Nebraskans for healthcare, Minnesotans for healthcare. Turns out they're all run by the same people. That's kind of what we're seeing here. And it's some of the most extreme groups on judicial issues as well are part of this umbrella network. And you're right. These are the groups that were going so far as to have a billboard rolling around D.C., a mobile billboard that was saying, Justice Breyer, retire. I mean, that's really out of line, I think, and inappropriate for the level of the Supreme Court justice to be treating him with that much disrespect. It's as if once they had an opportunity to replace him with someone younger and more radical, they had no more interest in Justice Breyer, despite him being one of the liberal members of the court.
But just to kind of give folks a sense of how far these groups will go, they were also the ones involved in the anti-Kavanaugh effort.
Absolutely. It's the same people. And they even, when Justice Breyer was promoting his most recent book, they were going to his speech and heckling him. I mean, it's really bizarre that the idea that this is a good way to approach our judicial system. They were mounting campaigns. And remember, there were some groups that recently were at his house protesting in advance of the Dobbs decision, trying to intimidate Justice Kavanaugh. So they're really not willing to stop at anything, whether it's smear campaign or implicit threats against the justices themselves. And that's completely antithetical to our American spirit and to what the Supreme Court is supposed to be, which is judges who are insulated from those kinds of pressures and not people who are going to be the target of these types of smear campaigns. So I think we have to be really clear and firm to stand against that.
Carrie Severino, final question for you. I know this is essentially an exchange of a liberal on the court for another liberal, although I would say she's probably to the right of the current justice, to the left of the current justice. Will she face just token Republican opposition in the Senate, or might they really take a hard look at her judicial background and put up a significant fight in her confirmation process?
Well, unfortunately, the reality is we only have 50 votes in the Senate. So even if every single Republican voted against her, she still technically has enough votes to get through with Vice President Harris's tiebreaker. And that's a reminder to everyone. Elections have consequences, and it doesn't just mean the president. The senatorial elections have real consequences. If we had a different Senate, you might not have seen the most radical nominee picked for this slot, right? But Biden knew that he could put through anyone as long as he had that bare minimum control of the Senate. I think we should, of course, never go the direction of having these personal attacks and smear campaigns, but we do have to have a serious inquiry into her judicial philosophy. I think this is an opportunity to remind the American people about the significance of the court and the significance of the issues being decided there, and to make sure that those, including any Democrats and Republicans who decide to vote for her, recognize what they're endorsing in terms of that approach, that freewheeling approach to the Constitution that allows judges to become politicians. So we need to make sure that conversation, this is our opportunity where there's a spotlight on it to have this discussion, even if ultimately the Democrats refuse to break ranks and they just greenlight yet another radical nominee by this president.
And I also think it's helpful to make the left spend up their money in advance of a midterm election. Carrie Severino, always great to talk with you. Thanks so much for joining us this afternoon. Appreciate all the great work you do on the judicial front.
Thanks. Have a great day.
All right.